Russia is so vast that when it's morning in Moscow, the evening sun is already setting 8,000 kilometers further east on Russia's Pacific coast. These distant shores are shrouded in a mysterious veil of smoke. Here, the largest sea eagle in the world surveys a land of ice and fire. Starting from Moscow, you have to cross 9 time zones to reach Russia's eastern shores. At its easternmost point, the Russian mainland narrows like a spear pointing down towards Japan, forming the Kamchatka peninsula, one of the most violently active volcanic regions on Earth. The peninsula forms a link in the Ring of Fire, a circle of volcanic activity which extends south from Alaska to the Philippines and New Zealand. 18 volcanoes on Kamchatka are still active. In 1955, almost 2.5 million tons of molten rock were ejected in one eruption. Kamchatka lies at the welding spot, where 3 giant segments of the Earth's crust meet and constantly grind against each other, creating earthquakes and volcanoes whenever one is forced upwards. Showers of ash and lava relentlessly destroy everything in their path. The violence is also creative, as these volcanoes are still forming new landscapes. After thousands of years, suffocating ash is transformed by wind and rain into fertile soil. Nutrients and minerals drain into rivers and lakes, creating rich feeding grounds for fish. Beneath the shadow of a slumbering volcano, the waters of the Kurilsk Lake seem to come alive as shoals of sockeye salmon swim towards the mouth of one of the rivers which feed the lake. This lake lies within an ancient volcanic crater. The salmon are returning to the same river in which they were spawned, locating it by smell. By the time they approach the mouth of the river, an ugly transformation has taken place. The male's back becomes humped and the jaws hooked. Strong, curved teeth grow from the jaws and tongue. These are for fighting, not feeding. The struggle upstream against the current claims many lives. Volcanic activity allows the salmon of Kamchatka to spawn even in the grip of January. While most of the lakes and rivers are frozen, there are some stretches of water which are warmed by heat rising from the bowels of the earth. The winter run of salmon supports Steller's sea eagles, the largest sea eagles in the world. Almost 2/3 of the world population of 7,000 Steller sea eagles spend the winter in Kamchatka. The rest migrate to Japan and Korea. Hundreds of fish perish before they even reach the shallow spawning grounds, their reserves of fat exhausted. The eagles gather like black-cloaked priests attending the death throes of the salmon. They often sit hunched in one place for several hours before making a catch. Although the young birds are the same size as the adults, it will be 4 years before they finally take on their striking plumage. There's plenty of fish for everyone, but the eagles seem to prefer to wait for another bird to make a catch and then try to steal it from them by knocking the bird off balance with their powerful wing thrusts. The adults catch most of the fish, but the immature birds seem to feed at their expense. Almost a quarter of the birds wintering here are the adults' offspring from previous years. When the young birds launch an attack, their parents often allow them to get their own way. A young bird mantles its prey with its wings, trying to protect it from being stolen by mobbing black-billed magpies and crows. Sometimes the juveniles have to acknowledge defeat. These are huge birds. From bill to tail tip, a female measures nearly 1 meter, and the wings span over 3. The massive yellow bill can rip a large salmon apart in seconds. Crows and magpies are dwarfed as they audaciously nip in to steal morsels of fish from between the eagle's talons. The salmon, which have run the gauntlet of the waiting eagles, finally reach the shallow gravel beds where they will spawn. The males defend the area against other males, sometimes even battling with teeth and hooked jaws. Each female can lay up to 1,000 eggs, but often dies before being able to release them all. She prepares a depression in which to lay her eggs, throwing the gravel aside with sinuous waves of her body. If Russian conservationists had not limited salmon fishing by the Japanese after the 1970s, these rivers would now lie silent, and every other animal which depends upon the glut of fish would probably have perished too. When goosandas arrive at the spawning grounds, it soon becomes apparent why the salmon laid so many eggs. It becomes a free-for-all as the birds repeatedly dive beneath the water's surface to pick up eggs hidden beneath the gravel. Like the eagles, the goosandas are only able to remain here throughout the harsh winter because the salmon provide an alternative source of food. After spawning, every salmon dies. The lakes and rivers become clogged with corpses, which in turn enrich the waters as they decay. By the 17th century, the Russians could no longer afford to ignore these rich stocks of fish and other wildlife in eastern Siberia. The numbers of fur-bearing animals in European Russia were falling, and the promise of limitless quantities of sable lured the Russians farther eastwards. These far eastern forests are so remote that it took Russian fur trappers 2 years to get here. The Far East became New Siberia, Russia's new world. The Russian government collected an annual tax in furs from Siberian natives. Sable, a member of the marten family found only in Russia, were hunted in the depths of winter when they're easier to track and their fur is thickest. The hunters followed tracks leading to the sable's burrow and drove the sable into a net spread across the entrance. They often had to wait for several days before the sable finally emerged. The sable's solitary and nocturnal habits probably helped to protect it from total extinction, despite 2 centuries of overhunting. But by the start of the 20th century, the sable was teetering on the edge of extinction. Hunting was banned, and sables bred in captivity were successfully reintroduced into the wild. Sable fur is prized for its combination of softness and durability. Blowing on the pelt reveals the quality of the dense underfur. Native peoples, such as the Udage, still depend on wild forest animals for their livelihood. Sable pelts are used as decoration for their clothes. The Russians, who followed in the trappers' footsteps, began to settle along the coast, where sea trade and fishing soon took over from hunting. When the sea is frozen, city dwellers still fish through holes in the ice in the traditional way, though more for sport than out of necessity. Despite the fact that the sea is frozen throughout most of the winter, the city of Vladivostok emerged as one of the largest ports in the Russian Far East. This is the last stop on the Trans-Siberian Railway. It takes a week to travel the 9,240 kilometers from Moscow by train. The city has become a dominant military outpost on Russia's eastern coast, and until recently was closed to foreigners. Above Vladivostok, the tangled forests begin. The wild and little explored Sikoti-Alin mountain range runs like a spine south to the city. This is tiger country. Over the last few years, several tigers have been seen in the suburbs of Vladivostok, and each has been shot. The Siberian tiger is the largest wild cat on Earth. It's thought that the tiger's thick fur and insulating fat first evolved in the snows of central China. 3 million years ago, the tiger's common ancestor spread north to Russia and south to Asia. As soon as the Russians began to settle in the east, Siberian tigers were hunted and flushed out of their native forests. Hundreds of tiger cubs were trapped for export to zoos around the world. By the 1930s, numbers had fallen to only 30 animals. The extinction of the largest and most powerful cat on Earth seemed inevitable. Adult tigers continued to be shot until 1947, when they were finally recognized as being an endangered species. But trapping of tiger cubs continued until 1956, when it was finally banned. Tiger numbers in the Russian Far East have increased to around 400 animals, but now success has created its own problems. The Siberian tiger is not safe yet. Lying just over 300 kilometers north of Vladivostok, the Lazovsky Reserve was created in 1935. This is where Siberia meets the exotic East, creating a unique forested landscape of stone birch, Korean pine, and Mongolian oak. By April, the snow is on the retreat. A long-tailed rosefinch feeds on the first catkins. Frogs seek out pools of water as soon as the ice has thawed. Females are attracted by a massed choir of males who are already waiting in the water. Each female lays over 3,000 eggs, so the pool is awash with spawn. Though they look similar to our common frog, the call of the Russian wood frog is very different. This species is unique to this part of Russia. As soon as they enter the water, each female is seized by a male. Sometimes he's joined by others until the female is surrounded by squirming legs as the first suitor tries to kick the later rivals away. It's not uncommon for females to drown beneath the weight of males. Galina Salkina is in the front line in the battle to save the Siberian tiger. As a scientist on the reserve, she spends most of her time alone in the forest, following the tiger's spoor. Tigers are such secretive animals that she has to seek evidence of their presence from clues that they leave behind. They leave scrapes of urine and droppings along their trails. By smelling a handful of grass from a scrape, Galina can tell whether a female is on heat. These are the same signs that tigers use to recognize and avoid each other. Galina stops at a forest hut to study the remains of the tiger's kill. She has found that over half the tiger's victims are wounded or deformed in some way. This boar had been hit by a poacher's bullet in the lower jaw and was blind in the left eye because a long bone had grown across the socket. Other scientists working within the reserve inform Galina whenever they hear reports of tigers nearby.
Привет, Саша.
Здравствуйте.
Ну как дела?
Ну все нормально, проехал. 11 лет тигра только
Далеко?
ведет сюда. Был случай на прошлой неделе.
Sasha Ladigin has seen footprints of a tiger in the forest nearby, leading towards the hut. He thinks they may have been made by a large male.
Настоящая тигра лежала все.
Ну это что?
Я начал подходить, она встала, уходить. Я говорю, куда ты пошла?
А большой?
Да большой тигр.
Galina has followed two tigers, a male and female, since birth. She knew their parents before them. As they're only 2.5 years old, they don't yet have home ranges of their own and are forced to hunt along the edges of the reserve. This makes them very vulnerable to poachers. Tigers make paths which they follow regularly while patrolling their hunting range. Despite broad paws, their feet still sink into the snow, leaving clear footprints. Galina measures a number before she's able to identify them as having been made by a particular male or female. After a tiger makes a kill, it spends over a week near the carcass, feeding off it from time to time. If a person approaches, the tiger usually retreats, even if this means abandoning the carcass. It may track them for some distance, remaining invisible, though it may be very close. A tiger is able to eat a great deal at one sitting, but it still leaves plenty behind for the scavengers. Jays and many other birds depend on tiger kills during the hard winters. Even sea eagles take advantage of the tiger's kill. Between them, 400 tigers consume at least 20,000 animals a year. To provide this amount of prey, the forests need to contain 600,000. At the moment, numbers of deer and wild boar fall well below these figures. Galina believes that the size of the reserve should be increased to protect prey from poachers and also to allow the tigers to hunt entirely within a protected area. In winter, wild boar feed on fallen spruce cones blown down by the cold winds from the west. They are the tiger's main prey in the autumn and winter. Tigers move so silently through the trees that sometimes it's difficult to know who is doing the watching. Once, when Galina was tracking a tigress, the footprints began to curve in big loops. She lost them in the gathering darkness and returned to her hut. The following morning, she found that the tigress had followed her back, and its tracks encircled the hut. Galina is sometimes joined by Volodya, her husband, as the trail can go on for several days and nights. The tiger's hunting domain is vast. Galina is concerned that a young tiger may have already been killed, but she's determined to try to find out what's happened and protect the tigers within the reserve. The clues she has found indicate that a tiger has passed this way recently. A fall of fresh snow soon hides footprints, so it can't be very far away. A roar in the darkness means that the trail is still warm. Galina has heard of a tigress with 2 cubs, which had been seen recently by some villagers, and has been concerned for their safety. Her worst fears are confirmed. These 2 cubs starved to death without their mother to feed them. Galina believes that the tigress was killed by poachers. From paw and teeth measurements, she estimates that the cubs are about 5 months old. A tigress cannot move far from her cubs for the first few weeks of their lives, and she's forced to hunt in a very small area of forest. The cubs need their mother to suckle them for the first 6 months. They're dependent on her for food until they're nearly 2 years old. The problem is that there are now more dogs and domestic animals than wild prey within the tiger's reach in the Lazovsky area, so tigers are forced into conflict with man and invariably lose. The farmers' fields come right up to the edges of the reserve. Deer sometimes come down to feed on the stubble at night, so the tigers have learned to patrol these areas, especially young tigers. Life in Kamenka village is hard. People find it difficult to grow enough food on their small plots to feed themselves, let alone the few pigs, chickens and cows that they keep. Many are resorting to poaching deer for meat. They see themselves as victims of the tiger's greed. It makes it that much harder to tolerate if you find a tiger in your backyard eating your dog.
Even if my husband was here, I don't know what we could do. We don't have any guns. Of course, I don't want tigers even to eat a dog. I would protect my dog. Not long ago, our dog was eaten by a tiger. We were all looking for it. We had been feeding the dog for a long time, and everything is so expensive nowadays. There is no food, but we have to scrape a living somehow. If we don't keep animals, we won't be able to survive.
Local people feel both resentment and pride towards the reserve, which lies at the heart of their community. The walls of the reserve headquarters depict the fragile web which must remain intact if the tiger is to survive. Hunting deer and wild boar is now banned, but poaching still takes place. The antlers of Sika deer are exported to China as medicine to replace rhino horn. Animals bred in captivity only provide more temptation and conflict for the tiger. The only way to film Siberian tigers in the wild is to bait them with a carcass. Galina is worried that baiting might put her tigers at risk if poachers copy her. But she feels that it's worth the risk if this film shows the outside world the problems which are threatening tigers in the Russian Far East. Working with the cameraman, this is her only chance to see the tigers she has been following for so many years face to face at night. On the first few nights, only a raccoon dog emerges from the darkness to feed on the carcass. If the tiger does appear, it will have to be filmed with an image intensifier, allowing the camera to see in the dark. After waiting for several nights, Galina is finally rewarded. A male silently appears and warily begins to feed on the carcass. Tigers are hunters of the night and are extremely sensitive to the slightest movement. Their eyes are able to make use of the faintest ray of light by reflecting it so that it hits the retina twice. This gives the eyes a strange glow in moonlight or under lamplight. Aware of a sound from the direction of the hide, he retreats as silently as he arrived. When morning light reaches the forest edge, Galina knows that the tiger is probably lying up somewhere nearby, resting. She keeps up her vigil as Siberian chipmunks begin the daily search for insects and cedar cone seeds on the forest floor. Tigers are nearly always nocturnal when they hunt, but they sometimes return to feed on a carcass in early morning or at dusk. They seldom eat their prey as soon as it's killed, but usually drag the carcass to a secluded spot and return to it many days later and drag it to a new hiding place. He's unable to remove the baited carcass, which is tied down. Only 2 out of every 10 attacks made by the tiger are successful. It pulls down its victim by sinking its huge claws into the hindquarters. The prey is actually killed by the tiger's long canines, striking at blood vessels in the neck and crushing the spine. The Siberian tiger's large size enables it to conserve heat. The Bengal tiger of India averages around 200 kilos, while the Siberian tiger can be almost double that weight. It's not only the cold that Siberian tigers have to contend with. They need to patrol enormous hunting ranges because their prey is nomadic and thinly dispersed over a very wide area. Indian tigers are able to maintain small territories because the prey in their forests is much more concentrated. As it's impossible for them to patrol the boundary of their domain once it exceeds a certain size, Siberian tigers are forced to share their hunting territories with other members of the same sex, which is very unusual for such highly territorial animals. The tiger's need for large stretches of unbroken forest makes the species vulnerable to any threat which reduces the size of its domain.
We try to defend ourselves as we can. Sometimes we shoot in the air. The tiger is dangerous. It can come and kill the animals. It's our livelihood. I have a rifle at home. I would shoot in the air. It's very expensive to shoot a tiger. We don't have the sort of income here to shoot tigers.
The villagers have every right to expect a living here. Yet by clearing more of the forest for agricultural land and poaching the tiger's prey, both people and tigers are treading on thin ice as far as the future is concerned. The world's largest expanse of uncut forest still lies in eastern Siberia. The forests in European Russia are fast disappearing. Until very recently, wastage was enormous because of antiquated equipment and inefficient transport. Over half the cut timber was being left behind to rot. Until now, the distance of the far eastern forests from Moscow prevented logging on a large scale. But as the felling of Malaysian and American old-growth forests is reduced, Western countries have begun to turn towards Russia with greedy eyes. Russia's enormous forests lie just on Japan's doorstep, but until recently they were out of bounds. With the collapse of communism, the Russians have been keen to attract foreign investment. A few years ago, Japan signed its first contract to export timber from the Russian Far East. Russian processing plants are infamous for their inefficiency and hazardous working conditions. In contrast, the Japanese have already invested in a state-of-the-art sawmill and automated production line in the Russian Far East. Korea has also started logging there. Conservationists fear that efficient Japanese logging will be even more of a threat to Russia's vast forests than Russian wastage. By May, the snow cover on Kamchatka is only just beginning to retreat, yet the brown bears have already emerged from their dens. Kamchatkan brown bears are the largest in Russia, weighing up to 750 kilos. Only the Kodiak bear of Alaska is larger. They are drawn to the steep sides of river valleys, cloaked in ash, where there's still volcanic activity. Here, the warmth of the hot springs, steam, and fertile soil encourage early growth of plants, creating a lush fringe of vegetation. This valley of bubbling mud pools and geysers lay hidden until the 1940s. There are 22 active geysers, shooting spurts of water and steam over 40 meters into the air. In some hot springs, the temperature of the water can reach 72 degrees centigrade. At these high temperatures, chemicals such as arsenic and silica dissolve from rocks below the surface. On contact with the cooling air, they're encrusted in mounds around the vents. The valley is hidden behind a permanent cloud of steam. Brown bears are disappearing from many of the forests of European Russia, but in Kamchatka they find a safe haven. There are believed to be at least 10,000 bears on the peninsula. The bears start fattening up long before the rest of the snow-covered landscape has emerged from winter's grip, feeding on emerald green banks of dropwort and bedstraw. True spring comes later to the forests of stone birch and Kamchatkan fir. The tiny red-breasted flycatcher arrives from southern Asia to breed. The warmer weather means that there are enough insects for the parents to keep up a constant feeding rota at the nest. Lesser spotted woodpeckers are also spending most of their time ministering to their young. By early June, it becomes obvious why Kamchatka is such a haven for fish. Once the snows have melted, there's water everywhere. This may explain why Steller's sea eagles breed only here. Until now, only a few Russian ornithologists have been lucky enough to see the breeding behavior of these birds. They nest only along a narrow strip of coast and in wooded river valleys, wherever there's water containing fish. The parents bring food to the nest about 5 times a day, and it's usually salmon. The same nest may be used for 10 or even 15 years in a row, as suitable trees are hard to find. It's added to each year and often grows to exceed 2 meters in width. Heavy rain and snow often increase the weight of the nest, causing it to collapse. This sometimes happens while it contains a young bird still unable to fly. Two eggs were laid in early May, but it's quite common for only one chick to survive. As the nests are only 5 meters above the ground, they're vulnerable to attack by sable or ermine. The eagle's breeding period coincides with the summer run of salmon. As the salmon begin to swim upriver, the eagles are not the only predators to be attracted by the noisy, thrashing bodies. Brown bears also come down to the river to take advantage of the glut of fish. It all looks too easy, and perhaps this is the problem. There are just too many salmon within easy reach to choose from. Whatever the reason, Russian bears seem far less successful than American bears when it comes to catching fish. Most eagles nest in trees overlooking salmon rivers, and they seldom have to fly far to find food. Both the male and the female bring fish to the nest. Over 300 pairs breed away from the forests and rivers of the interior, building their nests along the rugged cliffs of the coast. Despite their rarity, the eagles have come into conflict with commercial hunters who shoot them because they believe eagles damage the fur of animals caught in traps. In an effort to protect the eagles, Russian scientists have begun to compensate hunters for pelts which have been damaged, hoping that the hunters will no longer see a need to shoot them. The sea eagles share the coast with another victim of Russian hunters, but this carnage took place in the 18th century when Kamchatka was first discovered. Sea otters were once found in abundance along the shores of the North Pacific between Japan and South California. They were so prolific here that the sea around Kamchatka was called the Sea Otter Sea. Sea otter furs were sold to China, where the best pelts fetched 40 times the price of fox, even more than sable. The sea otters had no defense against the hunters, who caught them in nets or with harpoons as they slept in beds of kelp. One hunter describes how the mothers never abandoned their young except as a last resort. If they heard the little ones cry, they dashed up and allowed themselves to be taken. This is the reason why the hunters take or kill the little ones first, since they are certain that it will be easy to take the mother. As with most Russian fur-bearing animals, they were so prized that they were hunted to the brink of extinction. In a nest overlooking the crashing waves of the Pacific, a young Steller's sea eagle waits to be fed. The adults on cliff nests feed their young on salmon, but the monotony of the diet is sometimes broken when they bring gull chicks taken from nest colonies nearby. There's an eagle nest every 8 kilometers or so along the rugged coastline of the Sea of Okhotsk and the Bering Sea. As the waves and spume crash below, the young eagle begins to exercise its wings. It will soon be ready to leave the nest. More by error than design, Russia's wilderness still remains largely intact. Despite its recent turmoil, a new Russia may yet emerge with the economic strength and political stability necessary to preserve these magnificent eagles and the rest of the rich wildlife which this vast country is lucky enough to contain.